Bethlehem, Holy Ghost Town. It takes a cataclysmic war to allow one to contemplate, without the presence of another soul, the shrine that marks the spot where the world's most popular religion began. The Grotto of the Manger, beneath the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, is completely deserted. Usually, the queues of the devout, and the conveyor belt fashion in which they are hurried along, resemble security at a busy airport. No longer. This could be the relic of a defunct sect, rather than the birthplace of Jesus Christ. 1 million foreign tourists visit Bethlehem each year. Their presence is vital to the Palestinian economy of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. But by 11 a.m. on the morning of October 7th, some 5 hours after Hamas launched its murderous rampage across the border of the Gaza Strip, the normally teeming streets of the Old City had emptied. By October 10th, every tourist had left the region. They have not returned, and are not thought likely to do so for a long while. In security terms, Bethlehem was quiet this week, as the Israeli Defense Forces conducted raids against Hamas operatives in other parts of the West Bank. Mowing the lawn is what the military calls these punitive actions. Yet the little town remains in the eye of a storm that threatens any future peace negotiations, however unlikely they seem now. We have been invited to lunch in the Old City by a group of Palestinian friends, both Christian and Sunni Muslim. For all its cozy, caroling image, Bethlehem is a prime example of the great disconnect here. On the short journey south from Jerusalem, we follow the West Bank barrier, which was built to separate Israel proper from potential Palestinian suicide attacks, and indeed, most Palestinians living beyond it. A sign at the IDF checkpoint at the gates to Bethlehem warns that no Israeli citizens are permitted to enter. We pass along the road that runs beside King Solomon's pools, which glint green with fetid antiquity. On a ridgeline above, the 21st century condos of the Israeli settlement of Efrat overlook Palestinian Authority-administered streets which, with their decrepit housing, potholed roads, and uncollected garbage, resemble the Third World. The centre of the Old City is very different. The warren of ancient cobbled streets has been charmingly restored with funds provided by foreign aid. But the shops and hotels are shuttered, Manger Square deserted. We eat hummus and falafel around a little table outside a Palestinian Christian-owned souvenir shop. Present are the shop's owner, George, his 23-year-old son, Michael, a Palestinian Christian tour guide called Saif, and a Sunni Muslim, Ahmed. George is on the verge of tears. This should be the Bethlehem high season in the run-up to Christmas. His shop might expect to take $8,000 a day in sales. But now, zero, brother, he cries. 40 families who make these souvenirs depend on my shop. We're in shock. The men have no work. They don't even have enough money for cigarettes, only to feed the kids. Imagine that. They made agreement in 1993 and they said it was peace. But it's all brother. 300 or 400 young Palestinians have been killed by the Israelis in the West Bank in the last 2 years. Responds Saif. This is not the first, nor the second, nor the last war for us. 6 months ago, Ahmed began telling me to be ready for the end of the world, says George, and I laughed at him. And then this happens. How did he know? Nothing will change, Saif counsels. This war will stop and both sides will have lost, Palestinian and Jew. But what happened on October 7th didn't come from nothing. It came from big pressure on the Palestinian people. The men agree that if a free election were ever to be held in the West Bank, the ruling and relatively moderate Fatah party wouldn't be returned. In its place, Palestinians here would usher in Hamas, whose operatives slaughtered 1,400 Israelis 1 month ago. The corruption of the Palestinian Authority is incredible, says Ahmed. They're a mafia. The Israelis pay them to keep the West Bank quiet, and they put all their money in their pockets. It would be better for us even under Israeli control. Can you imagine I said that? Then Saif says, Hamas would change one thing, and that is the Israeli settlers here would start to be afraid. One of the main sources of tension between the two groups here are the olive trees and olive oil for which Bethlehem is famous. The hills about are covered in groves, and this is the time of year for the harvest. But Bethlehem is also surrounded by West Bank Jewish settlements. Since October 7th, tensions between the heavily armed and fearful or vengeful settlers and their Palestinian neighbors has exploded into violence. Several days ago, an off-duty member of the IDF was arrested for shooting dead a Palestinian farmer neighbor who had been trying to harvest his olive crop. In the early hours of Monday, last week, Jewish settlers came in cars and shot up George's home village on the outskirts of Bethlehem, he says. The men show me a video of a local teenager with a bullet wound in his leg. The men believe the attackers came from Efrat. Over the weekend, according to the Israeli press, the far-right Jewish politician, Zvi Sokot, called on the country's defense minister to ban this year's West Bank olive harvest entirely. It threatens the safety of the Jewish settlements, he said. We are already losing the harvest of my family's olive trees, says Saif. In the last 3 years, I'm afraid to leave the city after sunset. The problem is not the army, it's the settlers. After October 7th, they have become so mad and no government, no police court or authority will stop them. They can do anything they want. There is no justice, no freedom, no safety for us anymore. After lunch, we drive out of the tumble-down Bethlehem suburbs, past cracked walls displaying images of Hamas martyrs who have been killed in battles with the IDF since the morning of October 7th, up into the rugged West Bank hill country that surely changed little since the Nativity. Hard against the highway, a Palestinian is busy in the upper branches of an olive tree, his family gathering the fruit below. They have 40 trees on this roadside plot, he says, just enough to make oil for themselves for the year. They also own another 100 acres of trees further out of Bethlehem towards Efrat. We drive on, skirting south around Efrat, through a landscape of empty groves that would otherwise be busy with harvesters. In one Palestinian village, detour directions are spray-painted onto houses and outbuildings to guide travelers away from the guns and roadblocks of the nearby Israeli settlement. We stop to talk to another Palestinian farmer called Daoud and his 2 school-aged sons, Mohammed and Ahmed. They are harvesting olives from a grove of 70 trees set back from a narrow lane that is directly overlooked by Efrat, no more than half a mile away on the skyline. Daoud tells us his family have farmed this land for 250 years. But since the events of October 7th, he doesn't dare cross to the Efrat side of this narrow road, where the fruit of 800 of his trees is ready to be picked. The Israeli settlers would shoot me, he shrugs. It's because of the war in Gaza. We visit Efrat itself. Some 500,000 Israelis live in more than 120 settlements in the occupied West Bank that was, until 1967, controlled by the Jordanians. The United Nations consider these settlements to be a violation of international law and an obstacle to any lasting peace. Efrat is one of the largest West Bank settlements, with a population of 15,000. And while there has yet to be a direct post-October 7th attack, it is effectively a hilltop city under siege. The difference in living standards enjoyed by the settlers, considered to be among the most liberal of their kind in the West Bank, and those Palestinians living in Bethlehem below, is stark. There is a distinctly Californian suburban vibe to Efrat's urban planning and municipal efficiency. Domestic waste is not piled stinking along the roadside, but separated into recycling bins by the shopping mall with its highly regarded bagel cafe. We meet the mayor, a lawyer called Oded Revivi. He is blunt about how the world has changed and why the Palestinian farmers are right to be fearful of them.
Here, this is an overlooking picture of the city of Efrat. It's quite a challenging city to manage on a day-to-day basis. From one end to another, it's 5.5 kilometers. When you think about transportation, shopping center, schools, when the city looks like a long stretch of a hot dog or a sausage, it's a challenge. Here we have on top of that a security challenge. We're bordering 3 Arab villages, Wadi Nis, Abdallah Ibrahim, and Wadi Rachel, and we're also bordering the city of Bethlehem. Up until the 7th of October, we relied on very good neighboring relationships, a relationship that allowed us actually not even to have a fence surrounding the city of Efrat. You see all these green patches within the dimensions of the city, which are basically agricultural land, which is owned by private Arab individuals who up until the 7th of October came on a daily basis to come and work their land, grow whatever they wanted, and afterwards market it at whatever market they chose to. The levels of fear, the lack of trust between the residents of Efrat and the Arab neighbors has risen into levels that we have never experienced before. Any individual Arab who comes and works his fields, just like he used to prior to the 7th of October, raises alarm bells. But historically, we've managed to build here a relationship that there was no friction, there was no violence. The fear that the Arabs are expressing at the moment, I believe it. I can see why local Arabs are afraid that the Jews won't be as understanding as they were in the past. The level of trust between Israelis and Arabs has been breached in such a brutal way by a group of terrorists. What we're lacking at the moment in this whole scenario is those Arabs who feel that they're closer to the non-violent Israelis, to a civilized society like Israel. Where are they in condemning the acts of violence which happened in the Gaza Strip, trying to differentiate themselves from what we saw there, and maybe by that building the trust. Before the 7th of October, I was one of those who used to argue that the settlements are not the obstacle for peace. We were able to show cooperation and assistance between the Jews and the Arabs, which were only due to the fact that their populations living one alongside the other. There are industrial areas where we work on the same conveyor belts. There are shopping centers where we used to shop one alongside the other. We can argue whether the international law is right or not. As a lawyer, I can tell you that law always can be interpreted on both sides. Israel has good legal arguments explaining why we are entitled to live here. Israel has offered in the past, in endless times and events, under different leaders, different countries in the international community, all sorts of suggestions in order to bring a better reality, a peaceful reality into this region. All these offers have been rejected. To be even more accurate, if we go back all the way to 1947, the United Nations Partition Plan, which suggested building here two countries, a Jewish state and an Arab state, that was rejected by the Arab community and has been rejected basically up until today. We say about the Palestinians that they haven't missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. On the other hand, we see as time goes by, more and more Arab countries are actually building relationships with the Israeli state because they've realized that the Palestinians were the obstacle for peace. They were the ones who were depriving them, strengthening the relationship with Israel and the United States. What will be the solution now? I don't know to predict at the moment, where the wounds are still too fresh. I can say to you one thing, that if there was a prospect of finding a two-state solution by the 6th of October, where there were people who really believed in it and were moving forward towards to achieve it, today you see a big shift into people who don't believe it, don't believe that there is a side that we can actually trust, don't hear the voices condemning within the Arab population against what happened in the 7th of October. And that's why I think those who are rushing and saying this is the solution don't realize the breach of fragile trust that there was in this region and where we're going at the moment.
Before we leave Efrat, we stop to look towards Bethlehem. The call to prayer drifts from a mosque across the valley. The distance is less than a mile, but in terms of peace and community relations, it feels like an unbridgeable chasm.